welcome to another edition of Surgeons' Lives. I'm your host, John Monson. Today, it's my distinct personal pleasure to welcome Dr. George Fielding. I've known George for some decades now, since we first met in Australia in the 1990s. He is, as everyone will know, one of the legends of bariatric surgery, having refined his skill and his art in Brisbane, where he became very well known internationally for pioneering laparoscopic lap bands. He then moved to New York, where he has been for some decades now, and has developed an extraordinary range of interests. When I first knew George, he was known for somebody who was incredibly knowledgeable about wine, particularly French wine. But over the years, he's got an extraordinary range of interests in hunting, shooting, fishing, as they say. He's a blues musician, guitarist, pianist. He loves growing vegetables and working in the garden. There seems to be no limit to what this man has done in his life and continues to do following his recent retirement. I'm sure his story will be very interesting. So without further ado, join me for another edition of Surgeons' Lives.
Yeah.
So Brisbane, England, or
Yeah.
Scotland, with David Carter, a remarkable man, the Saint Mungo Professor of Surgery at the time before he went to Edinburgh.
I can say freely, he's the only surgeon I've ever been scared of. He was such an intimidating little. But when he retired, I flew back from Australia to be at his retirement dinner. He's an extraordinary man. And
he is an extraordinary man. He was very kind to me when I was starting out academically in the UK.
Yeah.
He had this remarkable ability of being able to say exactly the right words at the right moment. And he had a great committee skill, which was to let everybody argue it out.
Yes.
And he would never say a word, and then he would sum it all up when it was blatantly obvious, and everybody think he was a genius at that point, you know.
So when I was there with him, it was when he was the editor of the British Journal.
Yeah.
And so he taught me a lot about, I wrote a few papers with him. He taught me a lot about writing. And my co-fellow there was James Garden, and we became good mates as well.
Yeah.
And
his first, David Carter's first job as a registrar post-fellowship, strangely and bizarrely, was in Hull, a place he'd never heard of in his life, and was just sent down there. And he always told me the story of being on the first Saturday he arrived and going to see some enormously obese woman. And as David would say, something had clearly gone bang in her abdomen. And so he called up the boss, who said, "Will you better operate on her then?" To which David said, "Well, I've never done anything like that at all. I mean, I've just done my fellowship." To which his boss said, "Well, I've no intention of coming in, so you better get on with it." So,
I heard a great story like that. One of my boys that I trained in Brisbane went to the south of England. I won't say where, but and there was a patient came in with a ruptured aneurysm, and he'd seen them, but he'd never done one himself.
Yeah.
And he rang the boss, who was very senior and very famous, and he said, "Young man, this is a teaching hospital. You're about to have a learning experience." But he did it, and luckily everyone did well. And then he did a lot more, but it was so typical. I just read, I'm sure you've probably read it, this amazing book called "This Is Gonna Hurt," about being a resident, and in a teaching hospital,
Yeah.
well, these chaps would just never come in. I just read it literally this weekend, and it brought back a lot of memories.
No, there was quite a lot of that. I mean, it's I worked with guys in the UK who were good and very supportive, but I know that I did my first gastrectomy independently. I'd seen plenty of them at 2 a.m. with a nurse holding the book just in case.
Exactly.
You just had to work. It's not the right way of doing it.
Nope.
But the current way, I think that pendulum has swung the wrong direction because we are.
I had a similar experience when I was in my residency in Australia, and we had to do a year in the country.
Yeah.
And when we were on call for general surgery, orthopedics, and neurosurgery. And a guy came in with a compound tib and fib, and I rang the guy. He said, "Well, there's a book in Sister's office.
Yeah.
Just go to the correct page."
We had a medical school reunion a few years ago, and I think it was held in Ireland or something. I'm not sure where it was, but there's people come from around there. I think it was 35 years or something, and we always try to have a few talks given because it allows people to claim on tax. So it's the academic session. And my colleague and close friend Vivian McAllister, who is a liver transplant surgeon in Canada, just retired now. He was setting up his laptop, and so you could see the desktop. And he was about to talk about some liver transplant nonsense. And I said to him, "Just a minute, Vivian." I said, "I need to hear the talk there that's called Do-It-Yourself Neurosurgery." And he literally had this talk because he'd spent time with the Australian Armed Forces in Kandahar, and he and an orthopedic surgeon were the only two guys, and he said we had to teach ourselves neurosurgery.
Oh my God.
Crazy. So
Absolutely crazy.
So when I first met you, you and Les and John Lumley, and the young child, if you remember, the enfant terrible, who was Andrew Stevenson, and Nick O'Rourke, where at that point, you were a young and go-getter at that time, and you and Les, and you weren't going anywhere other than to vineyards, etc., because that was your big passion.
Yeah.
Did you see yourself? Was that you're going to be your future?
Yeah, I was introduced to wine very young by my father, who was obviously all Aussie stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And then I was lucky enough to fall in with some older guys who had set up a wine group, and they invited me. And they had no interest at all in drinking Australian wine. And so basically it was Bordeaux and Burgundy. And I was blessed because I just got to taste all these extraordinary wines. And then I got to know a couple of big guys in the Australian wine industry, James Halliday in particular, who's a great wine writer. And they had set up this group of 4 or 5 guys to buy a house in Burgundy in Montley, and they invited me to join them. And this was probably in the mid-90s, like 95, something like that, 96. Right. And so I did. And then every opportunity we had, we went from Australia there to meet the guys locally and get to know the culture, and, taste all these things. And it was just a lovely little village house. It's, sort of 4 bedrooms, but it's very humble, but it's gorgeous. It's right in the vineyards. And I just fell in love with it like lock, stock, and barrel. And so I've maintained that. My first great love was Burgundy, but I'd have to say in the last 5 years or so, I've really fallen in love with Barolo and in Piedmont. And Christine and I have been there 2 or 3 times over the years, and sort of same thing, meet the locals, get a deeper understanding. And it's a real, it's a passion, but it's also just a joy, and it's about as far removed from operating, as you can be. And, like you and a lot of other guys who are, that we all know, we work really hard, when we're working. And, I'm just the sort of guy that wants to do something that sort of takes me away from that a bit. And I think the skill set of these guys that make these mind-boggling wines, the passion they have for it, things they have to undergo and deal with the weather, it doesn't always work out. There's some sort of similarity, I think, and this is going to sound a bit silly, but, between winemaking and surgery. It doesn't always work out. It's not always easy, but when it's good, it's unbelievable. And that's sort of where I got this sort of the love of wine from. And now it started during the pandemic when we couldn't go out anywhere. We started these monthly dinners at our house just with our team, and Christine and Marina and Megan Jenkins, Loic Tachwani, and Paresh Shah, and we just all would meet once a month with the theme, and then basically they would prepare a lot of the dinners and I provide a lot of the wines according to the theme.
Yeah.
And it was a really bonding thing during, a truly terrible time here.
Yeah. And I remember, I've never forgotten the Magnum dinner that you very kindly hosted for me when I was in Brisbane the first time. I've never forgotten it. It was an extraordinary evening. And the thing that I've never forgotten was that it was so accessible. I like wine, I drink wine, and I enjoy it, but I'm not at the level of knowledge. And it's wine can be scary for people because it's traditionally quite pretentious, and I'm getting tobacco and rotten socks and stuff like that, etc. And you made it very accessible. And
thank you. It's partly the Aussie in me, I think, as much as anything else. Yeah. I don't, I'm like you, I'm sure. I just don't have much tolerance for bullshit, and I think I just want to sort of spread the joy and maybe get someone to take up the same sort of interests. And certainly it's happened here during the pandemic with these dinners, and everyone that's been involved has really, become more interested in the intricacies of it.
So you've said that, one of the biggest changes in your life was having the lap band.
Yeah.
And of course you became known as an inserter of lap bands,
indeed,
as well as a recipient of lap bands. And indeed, I would, and correct me if I'm wrong, but the lap band era was really what launched you onto the international stage, I think. Is that fair?
For sure. Yeah. Indeed.
And so, was that, which came first, chicken or egg?
Yeah. So, Paul O'Brien, who really was one of the guys that drove this around the world.
Yeah.
He had been doing open bypasses in Melbourne. I'd only done a few of them. I thought they were pretty horrible operations for people. These gigantic holes you can put your head in, and terrible complications, often to do with pulmonary embolus and stuff like that. And so Paul was invited by Vern Vincent, who had actually created this thing, and he went to Brussels and then came back to Australia and started doing them. And he rang me up one day and he said, God bless him, he said, you should get into this. You can do anything laparoscopically, and you're really fat, and you might have a good understanding of how this is going to go for people. Oh, thanks, mate. So I went down to Melbourne and I watched him, and I thought, this is about as hard as falling off a log. And compared to what I was doing, because by then, I was doing all the colon stuff, I was doing distal pancs, I was toying with doing livers and all that sort of stuff. And I couldn't believe how technically straightforward it was. But what I bought into from Paul and from Vern was the importance of looking after them afterwards. And, not just adjusting them, but being available to them, all that sort of thing. So I came back and I started doing them. And because God knows there were plenty of people in Queensland and northern New South Wales who needed the help. And I think it sort of coincided with this. This is when the world truly started becoming obese on a giant scale, that sort of mid-90s. And so I started doing them. And then because of the distances in Australia, I would fly up to Cairns and to Townsville and do clinics up there, both to meet new patients and then to do adjustments up there to save them all having to come to Brisbane. Because if you don't adjust these things, they don't work. And then, so I was doing them. I'd probably done a couple of thousand by the time 99 came around, and I was going along. I was very big, and then I had all sorts of heart troubles. I actually went into VTAC, went into the Wesley. And the guy looking after me, I started going to school with him when I was 5. And he looks at me, Mark Craig, he's passed away now, sadly. But he said, don't you friggin' die. I said, well, don't let me, mate. Please, if you don't mind, yeah. And so, then I went to see the cardiologist, and he said, mate, if you don't lose weight, a lot of weight, you're going to die. And so I rang Paul. I said, when can I come down and get a band? And he said, liquid diet for 2 weeks and I'll do it for you.
Yeah.
So I did. So, and that was in 99. So I went down to Melbourne with Jen, my first wife. I was scared out of my wits, and, about the surgery, but also about what it was going to be like afterwards.
Yeah.
But it went great. And it's gone great. I'm still down about 120 pounds. I've had it since 99, so it's like 24 years. And I have no doubt I wouldn't be here if I hadn't done it. I was just.
Do you do you still put bands in?
Yeah, nothing like before.
Yeah, I mean, the world changed.
I would say every week at NYU there are 2 or 3 bands.
Right, but while the world had shifted to sleeves and you were still putting some bands in.
Oh yeah, and we still do. The sleeve has obviously, dominated everything in the last 5 years.
Yeah.
And it's a great operation. The only issue with it is about a third of them put it all back on. That's the issue with it. And there's something really heartwarming about seeing someone you put a band in 20 years ago and they've still got it and they still like it. And they're the people who send their friends and family.
Yeah. Yeah.
The people that have done well, and we have literally thousands of them that we still see in follow-up. Now that I've stopped operating myself, all I do is do follow-ups.
Yeah.
And so my follow-up day might be, 40 band adjustments.
Yeah.
Because they're still coming, because they still work. But it's a lot of work. And I think one of the issues with the band was that it just is a lot of work to make it work.
Yeah. Yeah.
Whereas with the sleeve,
it's not just a one-shot deal. Yeah.
And that's to a lesser extent the bypass. It's a lovely little operation to do, and then it does its thing.
Yeah.
And you're not having to see them every month and do the band adjustments and all that. So, but the other, as I mentioned to you, I've had some health issues myself in the last couple of years, and even in simple terms, I had COVID 3 times, and what we know about COVID is if you're morbidly obese, it's not great.
Yeah.
And, then I got mild myeloma, and then I had a PE, probably as a side effect of that. And then I had an MI and got stents. And I think if I had been morbidly obese, I wouldn't have survived all this. Wow. And I think that's one of the driving forces that I think women come for bariatric surgery because they just hate being obese.
Yeah.
Men tend to come because something happens and they get scared.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point.
They're very different.
So when you were riding the crest of that wave, I remember you and Paul would travel far and wide doing these things, and leaving behind a large number of begrudgers sitting at home going, those bastards are off making untold amounts of money putting pounds in for people. The tall puppy syndrome was very real, et cetera. And then, boom, you did something that you weren't meant to do in the world. You're sitting there having a great life, raking the money in, and boom, you up and leave and go to New York.
Yep.
That was not in plan A.
It wasn't in the plan, and it wasn't easy.
I can imagine.
But and I'm still, it's a very hard thing to do, both from a family point of view and the country point of view. And one good thing that came out of it is I'm still very close with my children and with my first wife. She's been over to visit, bringing her boyfriend with her, and we all get on. But it was a huge jolt. But I just knew that if I didn't, I was going to go crazy, and it's a lot of the way my life has evolved is because Christine and I really enjoy doing the same things together.
Yeah.
Apart from working, I mean, she's the chief of the division at NYU. She's a brilliant surgeon and she's busy as can be. But apart from that, I think the reason we have such a good life together is that all of the things that we love, we do together. And I think that's been a huge change. I mean, she loves drinking wine, but she's not, crazy about it. But what we love doing together is like gardening, growing our own food, fly fishing, duck hunting, pheasant hunting, all those things, and traveling, and we just. I think it's a great respite from the work, because when I was in my prime, 2 or 3 years ago, when I still really was before I got sick, I mean, the volume of work we were doing at NYU was insane,
Yeah.
and we both realized that if we didn't, do these things together, get away, just get out of the place, we're going to go nuts. And, and I think one of the issues with a lot of surgeons is they don't have this.
Yeah.
And, and I think some of them tend to stay on too long because they've got nothing else to do.
Yeah, no, I'm sure that is true. I've spoken in this podcast to numerous people, and now, of course, I am in general speaking to the people who are happy in life.
Yeah.
You tend not to speak to the people who are sitting in the basement crying into their beer. But the reality is that, and it really doesn't matter whether it's driving a jag across America or sailing your boat around the world or drinking wine and shooting at birds. It's just something that isn't work.
Yeah. And it's enriching, and the other thing, with the hobbies that we have with the fishing and the shooting and stuff is we just meet a lot of really interesting non-medical people.
Yeah.
And like the fishing guides, the hunting guides, the other guys that are there doing it, they're about as far removed from a surgeon's tea room as you could possibly be.
Yeah, I can imagine. So you, when you were in Brisbane, were you a hunting, fishing, shooting type or not?
No. So I used to I was taught to fish by my father and grandfathers, but it was river and sea fishing.
Yeah.
Saltwater casting.
Yeah.
But I had done it my whole life. I'd never shot. And the shooting came, we would go to all these places to fish, and when we settled on 2 or 3 that became where we go, these guys would say, "Mate, you really should come back in autumn and winter and go shooting." And so and we eventually did, and then sort of fell in love with it, really. But I was always interested I loved fishing when I used to take my kids fishing, We loved it. We would go for a week to Fraser Island and, just sort of fish.
And in New York, you live outside of the city or in Manhattan?
So where I'm sitting now is in the middle of Manhattan on the Upper East Side.
Right.
About 10 or 11 years ago, we bought a house up in the Hudson Valley, which is about an hour and a half north of here, near a town called Millbrook.
Yeah.
And it's just an old colonial sort of house that's been renovated, and then we renovated a bit more. It's on 6 acres. So we've got, and Chris is just a really great gardener, and I love helping her, but she's the force behind it. And we started out just like with flowers and bushes and nice stuff. And then she worked out and learned how to grow food. And so we basically in spring and summer and early fall, we basically eat what she grows.
Right.
And then the other thing she got into was chickens. So we have 26 chickens. So we have the eggs, and she just took a whole pile of eggs into the office today to give to the girls. And so it's a lovely sort of communing with nature thing.
Yeah. And then you bought a place in Montana.
Right. Yeah. And so we started going out there 15, 16 years ago, and fell in love with it. It's true, a happy place. And and we've met some lovely people out there. So we go out there in the various seasons. So in the spring and the summer, it's for fly fishing.
Yeah.
And then in the fall, it's fly fishing and beginning of ducks. And then in the middle of winter, like in January, we go for the end of the duck season. And it's basically all done floating down the Bighorn River, and in a basically a rowing boat.
Yeah.
And we fish out of the boat, or we get out into the river and stand there and wade and fish. And then when we're duck hunting, we go down and with our guide Chris Stinson, and we just basically set up in the bushes on the bank. And the guide and Christine call the ducks in and the geese, and it's good.
And the main characteristic of the animals that you're attempting to slaughter are that they're not big enough to attack you.
Yeah, that's a very good point. And the other main characteristic of them is they're very yummy.
But I've never seen a picture of you out stalking a deer or a moose or anything.
No,
like
we
that.
don't. We don't.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
And so when we get all these ducks, I make sausage. I make chili. We eat the duck breasts. We used to shoot upland hunting for pheasant, but we just love the ducks more. And we're respectful of them. I'm not going to just sort of throw them in a corner.
For sure. Yeah.
And there's not much better than a roast, duck breast. So.
Yeah. So then out of the blue, as life was, I mean, you'd had a few brushes with mortality with your heart and Brisbane and et cetera, et cetera. And then out of the blue, somebody says, by the way, you have a disease that when you were a kid like me, you knew was a fatal disease.
Yeah.
That was not in the plan either.
It was not in the plan, mate. And it was, I just was getting so tired, I honestly couldn't walk up a flight of stairs. And so, it's like physician heal thyself, and typically we don't.
Yeah.
And so I went to my friendly cardiology guy here, Bill Cole, and he did blood work, and my hemoglobin was 9. And he said, right, you're off to see the hematologist, basically.
Yeah.
And if you can avoid it at all costs, never have a bone marrow biopsy.
Yeah.
It's
so smart
weird.
A bit, yeah.
But anyway, so she did it, and we were packed to go to Montana the next day. And the phone rings, and I'm sitting just across from where I'm sitting now. And there's this lovely lady oncologist, and she said, I've got some news for you, George. You've got multiple myeloma. And I went, oh, shit. And she said, yeah. She said, what are your plans? And I said, well, we're just about to go to Montana for a week. She said, good. When you come back, I'm going to send you to see a friend of mine, and you're going to need to have chemotherapy and a bone marrow transplant. And so I went, ugh. So Chris walks in the door and says, what's wrong with you? So I told her, and it was a pretty tough day or two, I have to say.
And was it helpful going to Montana for the week, or
did
you just think I should be back starting this now?
Yeah, no, I just wanted to get away. And the other aspect of it was in the absolute middle of the pandemic. And so, I just didn't know what was going to happen, and I just wanted to go there one more time, basically. And we shed quite a few tears on the river with our guide. And Marina and Megan, our partners, came with us. And that's where I told them what was going on. And it was just like the old Kubler-Ross thing, I just had to sort of go through it. And it was, lovely having them there because they could sort of give Chris a bit of comfort as well. And then I came back and I went and met this chap, Gareth Morgan, who's Welsh, and he's like the world king of multiple myeloma. And I started it, and I was all, I did all the drug treatments, and then I went in and got sort of measured up to have a bone marrow transplant, and then I got COVID, And so I couldn't have the transplant. And I'm like, come on, man. And so then we had to back off for a while. And then Gareth said, I think let's just hold off on the transplant because you've had a good response. And he said, you're so immune suppressed with the treatment plus the COVID. He said, so I dodged a bullet really with that, and I didn't have to have it.
It's good.
And so this recently I've stopped the chemo sort of stuff, but I've got no IgG and no IgA at all. So I'm getting IgG infusions.
Yeah. Well, you are you're sitting here talking to me, which is the definition of success.
Yeah. No, indeed.
I always
what you said at the beginning was true. My memory, when you and I were young doctors of multiple myeloma, is as good night, Irene.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Exactly. It's very, very, very different now. Yeah, thankfully.
Yeah.
So it's interesting. Back to the wine issue. I'm sure you know Phil Quirk, the pathologist, the colorectal pathologist in Leeds. So Phil got a head and neck tonsillar cancer, and he had chemoradiotherapy, and Phil was a wine enthusiast, probably not at your level, but nonetheless, he enjoyed his wine. And he said, and he's cancer free for probably 15 years at this stage. But I remember him telling me that one of the unforeseen benefits of the chemoradiotherapy is that he now manages to thoroughly enjoy red wine out of a box because he can't taste it anymore.
Can't taste the goddamn
thing. So it saved him a fortune.
Yeah. Well, Christine thinks I poisoned the cancer with bourbon, so it's all right.
Exactly right. So do you have, I can imagine that as you emerge through these really quite an unreasonable number of brushes with mortality that you've had. Did it pause you to say, how did it change you? I mean, did it change you?
I think it made me very determined to enjoy every day of my life. It truly, really did. And I mean, I've always been a pretty gentle, easygoing sort of guy. Internally, I've been ruthless with myself to succeed and do well and help, a bazillion people. But externally, I'm pretty sort of calm. And I just became more that way. I sort of, I don't know, maybe I just wanted to enjoy life. I wanted to enjoy Christine and the kids and my ex, Jen, and my friends. One weird thing is it made me scared to fly to Australia because, I had the PE.
Yeah.
Mate, I mean, all this stuff is weird, but I woke up one morning and I just couldn't breathe.
Yeah.
I just dead set couldn't breathe. And so I go in and see Bill Cole, the cardiologist, and I said, mate, I think I'm having a PE. He looked at me and he goes, you shitting me, right? I said, no, I really think I am. And because there was another time after I had the MI, a few months later, I walked in and said, mate, I think I'm in atrial fibrillation. And he goes, what would you know about atrial fibrillation? I said, here, feel this. And so, you just never know what's around the corner. I mean, I know that's everyone says that, but when you've been through this sequence of things where each one of them could potentially finish you off, I just became determined to really enjoy life. And I have, I really have.
You sent me, the little resume thing that I ask people to send me. And the one thing that struck me was a word that is repeated throughout that, and this is the word love. You know, you love your passions and your Maseratis and your wife and your wine and Montana, etc., etc. And it struck me that one of the things that you've come to, which doesn't come to everyone, and I'm making this up, but it's my interpretation, that you've learned that spending time on hating things is not worth it.
That's 100% how I feel. You know, I certainly use the word love liberally, but that's probably the biggest thing that's changed. I just, every time I'm interacting with anybody about anything, I'm getting pleasure out of it. And I just never seek confrontation at all anymore. I used to be, you know, when I was young and all the rest of it, but I just don't. And I do love my family. I do love my friends. And I love what the life that Chris and I have, and I love the things we do, and they make me happy every day. Like, I don't walk around going, oh, whoa, whoa, you know, pitiful me sort of thing. I'm just the opposite of that. It's like, lucky me. I'm still here.
Yeah.
And I can still do these things. So I'm going to make the most of it.
Yeah, and I'm a huge fan of a guy called Robert Sutton, who wrote a book which I keep a box of in my office. I literally keep a box of these. They're not expensive, I hasten to add, but it's a famous book called The No Asshole Rule. And he's the guy that wrote the book, The No Asshole Rule, in which he says, you know, the world is full of assholes. And as he said, we're not, you know, each of us has our bad day. As he said, even Mother Teresa, I'm sure, had a bad day every now and then. But he said, that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about the full-time professional card-carrying asshole. And as he says, you may work with these individuals on a daily basis. That's your privilege. I choose not to. And, you know, the people that when you finish talking to them, you feel lessened and diminished by the experience, as he said, you know, no, not for me.
Very true.
You know, I'm not for one moment saying that I'm wholly successful at it, but as I've got older, you know, what I've seen that I need to become less of that person as well, you know, because you know, you learn at different at rates and different events, and I think it's as you say, you've you know, I think I'd skip the myeloma, MIPE, and you know, if that's okay, you know, maybe I could just maybe I could just listen to you and learn from that rather than having to go through it, you know.
Trust me, mate, you don't want to go through it.
Exactly, yeah.
The hardest thing was just like thing after thing after thing. And I said, when's this going to bloody end? You know? And so I don't want it to end at all.
Yes, I was going to say, that's
it's going to.
I might want to rephrase that.
But I don't want, you know, I enjoy every day.
Yeah.
And one of the other things that's given me great relief is I love playing music.
Yeah.
So I started playing the piano when I was 7, I think. Did all the classical stuff, and then got into Elton and Bruce and Stones and all that sort of stuff. And I still play, and I play with a young guy here in New York. He's very gifted playing guitar and singing, and we play in this Irish pub in Midtown. And we also, you know, we have him and a few other friends come up to the house for a weekend. We just play music all day. And it just, you know, sometimes I'll play it and cry. Sometimes I'll bash the shit out of it, you know, depending on what I'm playing, obviously. But also, if I'm having one of those days, I'll play Sympathy for the Devil for 3 hours, on the piano, and I feel better. And but that was a great gift from my mum. She was an incredible pianist, and convinced me of the worth of playing. So that's been a good.
I ask people this question. It's not meant to be morbid, of course, but how would you like to be remembered, and how do you think you will be remembered? They're not necessarily the same thing.
To be remembered as a decent guy. I'd like to be remembered as a good dad. I'd like to be remembered as a good husband, and I'd like to be remembered as a good teacher of young surgeons.
And if you had to pick one of them, if you had to pick just the one,
pick one. Good guy.
Yeah.
Just
So, anything on the bucket list?
No, not really. Christine and I were just talking about that. As we've both got a little bit older, we tend to gravitate towards the familiar.
Yeah. Rather
than to, oh my God, we've got to go and do this and that. Because we've done a lot.
Yeah.
We've been, had good lives. And we're more likely just to go back to Montana for a week.
Yeah.
Or go to Burgundy for a few days, or go to Piedmont.
Okay, well, George, here are a few one of these 15-second questions that you're legally obliged to answer, where you have no time to think, and there are no correct answers. But as I say to people, I, of course, do know what the correct answer is. So if you're ready, to go ahead. So, baseball or football?
Football.
Coke or Pepsi?
Diet Coke.
Mac or PC?
Oh, Mac.
Cats or dogs?
Dogs.
Burger King or McDonald's?
McDonald's.
Stones or Beatles?
Ooh, that's hard. Stones.
French or New Zealand?
French.
Home or away?
What was the last one?
Home or away?
Home.
Well, on that note, George, I want to thank you again for spending an hour to tell us your story. It's great to see you again. I haven't seen you for years, and I'm so happy that you have such joy in your life.
Thank you. I appreciate
that. I hope for many more years to come, you can terrorize the flying and swimming population of Montana.
Particularly the flying ones.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
All right, mate. Thanks a lot.
And I'm sorry about all the high-tech stuff. Okay. All right. Bye, George.